Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we explore the convergence of history and the future, a new era of intelligence. Good evening.
So I want you to imagine something for a second. If I took your brain, right, carefully removed it from your skull, put it in a nutrient-rich jar, and hooked every single nerve, ending up to a supercomputer running this flawless, perfect simulation of the world, where actually are you?
Oh, the classic brain in a vat thought experiment.
Exactly. Are you floating in the jar, or are you, walking around in the simulation?
It never really fails to induce a little bit of existential vertigo, does it? Because it forces us to confront how bizarre our own existence truly is. I mean, we all walk around feeling like an eye, right? Like a distinct passenger looking out through the windshield of our eyes.
Right, yeah, like we're driving a meat suit.
Exactly. Yet for the last century or so, the dominant scientific paradigm has insisted that the passenger is a total illusion. They say that you are just the jar. You are the meat, the electrical signals, the complex chemical reactions.
Which, that always felt so incredibly hollow to me,
Hmm.
because we treat the human body and the brain like an incredibly complex piece of biological machinery, and we love that approach because it's measurable.
Yes, it's highly quantifiable.
Right, like you break your arm, the x-ray shows the jagged white line, the doctor points to it and says, yep, broken. But the second you step into the philosophy of the mind, the question of consciousness of what you actually are, that x-ray machine is completely useless. We are just staring into an absolute void.
We really are. And philosophers and neuroscientists, they refer to this as the hard problem of consciousness, because we can map the neural pathways that fire when you say, look at an apple, but we have absolutely zero idea how those electrical signals translate into the internal subjective feeling of experiencing the color red.
So we are thrilled to have you with us today on this deep dive because we are tackling that massive ancient question. But we're doing it from an angle I can almost guarantee you haven't heard before.
No, probably not.
Yeah, we aren't looking at a new fMRI study or a standard philosophy textbook today. Today's source material centers on a really fascinating research project called Shattering the Flasks, or in its original Arabic, Tatim el-Khawer.
And the origin of this research is really what makes it so compelling, because we are examining an incredibly rigorous, extensive dialogue. But it isn't a debate between two human academics at some university.
Right.
It is a structured research dialogue between a human researcher, Said Mobarak, and an advanced artificial intelligence.
Which is just wild to me.
It is, and their shared mission was incredibly ambitious. They wanted to extract a complete, cohesive, and functional theory of human consciousness entirely from the text of the Qur'an.
I remember reading the brief for this and just sitting back in my chair, just mind blown. The intersection of an ancient religious scripture, cutting-edge AI, and the philosophy of mind. It sounds like the premise of a sci-fi novel.
Where it really does sound like science fiction.
But when you look at the documentation, it is this meticulously crafted linguistic mapping. Now, just a very quick but important note to you, the listener. Our goal today is to explore the intellectual framework these researchers built.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Exactly. We are treating this text exactly the way the AI and the researcher did, as a raw, objective data set. We aren't here to endorse specific religious viewpoints or, take political sides. We are simply acting as your guides to convey the ideas and the sheer scale of the theory that emerged from this project. We want to see how they built this model. Okay, so let's unpack this.
That framing is so essential because the methodology they employed is really the foundation of everything we're about to discuss today. And it starts with that title, Shattering the Flasks.
Which is a metaphor, right?
Yes, exactly. The flasks represent the centuries of inherited human interpretations, the preconceived notions, the cultural biases, and the philosophical baggage that humans inevitably attach to an ancient text over time.
So it's like if you pour pure water into a green glass flask, the water looks green. The text looks like whatever the culture of the time wants it to look like.
Precisely. And the researchers wanted to shatter that green glass entirely. They wanted to view the text purely through its own internal lens, completely bypassing hundreds of years of human commentary. And to do that, they developed an incredibly strict 9-step protocol.
It honestly reminded me of reverse engineering alien technology.
That's a great way to think about it.
Like, imagine a team of scientists finds a piece of a crashed ship. Instead of guessing what the piece does based on Earth technology, they scan the entire ship to see everywhere else that specific piece is used, how it interacts with other components, what happens when it's removed. They basically let the ship explain itself.
That is exactly the approach.
But I do have a point of pushback here, because it seems like a massive trap to me. When you are looking at ancient texts, how do you avoid just projecting modern science onto it?
Oh, you mean confirmation bias?
Yeah. It's so easy to take a vague ancient word and say, oh, look, they predicted quantum mechanics, just because it sounds vaguely similar.
The researchers were hyper aware of that exact trap, which is why the AI was so crucial to the project. The AI doesn't have a theological agenda, right? It just processes data. So the first step of their protocol was comprehensive induction.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they didn't open an Arabic dictionary. They had the AI sweep the entire data set, gathering every single grammatical variation and derivative of a root word.
Okay, so they isolate the data. Then what?
Then they move to deconstructing attributes. And this relies on a foundational rule, which is, by their actions, they are known.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, instead of trying to define an abstract concept like desire or soul philosophically, they looked at the verbs associated with the entity in the text. What does it actually do? Does it command? Does it obey? Does it deceive? Does it feel pain?
Okay, that makes sense.
But the mechanism that truly prevents that modern projection you mentioned is their no synonymy rule.
Okay, yes. This rule is what kind of broke my brain a little bit. Explain the no synonymy rule to the listener.
So in their analytical framework, the text contains absolutely zero synonyms. None.
Zero.
Wow. If a different word is used, it has a distinct functional meaning. We are very used to reading poetry or literature where an author uses synonyms just to sound eloquent, to avoid repeating the same word twice.
Right.
But this methodology assumes the text does not do that at all. If it uses word A instead of word B, it is because word A performs a different specific function in the machinery of reality.
I really struggled with that at first. Because in everyday life, if I say, my mind tells me this, or my soul feels this, or my spirit is tired, I'm basically just using different words for the same vague, invisible part of myself. I'm just saying my inner self.
Right, we all do that.
But applying the no synonymy rule means you literally can't do that.
You can't. And that forces a level of precision that is pretty uncomfortable for most people. The researchers also use the rule of opposites.
How does that work?
They define terms by what the text actively contrasted them against. So if the text consistently places the word for justice in direct opposition to a highly specific word for corruption, you can triangulate the exact functional definition of both words based entirely on the text's internal logic.
Okay, so they isolate the words, they look at their actions, they refuse to treat anything as a synonym, and they triangulate meaning using opposites.
Yep. And there is one more crucial safeguard. They strictly distinguish between objective textual truth and quotes from human beings within the narrative.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah. If the text quotes a human character saying death is just the end of everything, the AI flags that. It categorizes it as the subjective, potentially flawed understanding of that specific human character. It does not treat it as the objective reality the text itself is asserting.
That is wild.
Yeah.
It's treating a religious scripture with the rigor of a legal contract or like a code base.
Yeah.
So let's look at the output here. If the text has no synonyms, what happens when you run all those vague interchangeable words like mind, soul, spirit, heart through this AI induction process?
What emerges is a highly specific, multi-layered anatomy of the self. By refusing to blur the lines between these words, the researchers were forced to draw distinct boundaries. And the model that materialized from the ancient text looks uncannily like the architecture of a modern computing system.
This is where the deep dive really begins for me, because this simulation model is just absolutely fascinating. I want to break down the hardware and the operating system of a human being according to this test. So let's start with the physical layer, the jasad.
The jasad is the biological body. If we use the computer architecture analogy, the jasad is the physical chassis. It's the motherboard, the plastic casing, the wiring, the physical actuators like your limbs, your vocal cords.
It's the meat.
It's the meat, exactly. But importantly, the text reveals through this induction process that the jasad has its own built-in, pre-programmed requirements. It has biological instinct.
Like hunger and stuff.
Yes. It requires food, it requires hydration, it requires sleep, and it has an instinct for procreation. However, the jasad possesses absolutely no independent will. It does not make moral choices.
So it's completely neutral. It's just a vehicle. Like a car doesn't decide to run over a pedestrian. The car just responds to the steering wheel, and it requires gas.
That's a very helpful way to visualize it. The Jasad is a neutral testing ground. It is fundamentally incapable of committing a moral crime on its own. It's just hardware waiting for instructions.
But hardware needs a power source. You can build the most advanced computer in the world, but if you don't plug it into the wall, it's just a really expensive paperweight.
Where does the power come from in this ancient model?
That introduces the second component, which is the Ruh. This is commonly translated as the spirit. The Ruh acts as the ultimate source code, or the divine power supply.
Okay.
When the researchers isolated the word Ruh and looked at its actions, they found it is the pure energy that boots up the biological system. It gives life.
But does it make decisions? Because usually when people talk about spirituality, they say things like, my spirit knows what's right. Well, under this strict methodology, no. The Ruh does not make choices, it doesn't formulate beliefs, it doesn't commit crimes, and it doesn't do good deeds. It is purely the animating force.
Wow.
And interestingly, the text indicates that the Ruh doesn't die. When the biological system shuts down, the power supply is simply withdrawn. It returns to its source.
Okay, so I have the hardware chassis and I have the electricity plugged into the wall. The computer is humming. The screen is on, but it's not actually doing anything. It's just sitting on the desktop screen. It needs a user. Someone has to sit at the keyboard.
Which brings us to the most critical component of the entire architecture, the nafs, the soul, or the self.
This right here was the biggest paradigm shift for me.
The naf is the user. According to the AI's linguistic sweep, the nafs is the true core you. It is the independent, non-material entity that sits at the controls of the biological jasad.
So it's pulling the levers.
Exactly. The nafs is the agent that formulates intention. It makes the choices. It feels the emotional weight of those choices. And ultimately, it is the only component that is held morally accountable.
And it's what actually experiences death, right? I found that detail completely staggering. The text doesn't say the body dies. It says the nafs tastes death.
Yes, the extraction process. The nafs is what experiences the severing of the connection from the hardware. It tastes the separation.
So you, the nafs, are logged into this biological vehicle.
Yeah.
But the user doesn't just reach out and touch the motherboard to make things happen. When you sit at a computer, you use a mouse, a keyboard, and the computer uses a CPU and RAM to process your commands.
Right, there's an interface.
And this textual model has processing units too. 5 distinct layers of conscious processing. I want to spend some real time here because this fundamentally changed how I view my own thought process.
It's an incredibly intricate system. So let's start at the front line of data intake. The first processing unit is the fuad.
The fuad. How did that function?
We can conceptualize the fuad as the preprocessor, or the RAM, random access memory. Its primary job is to catch rapid incoming sensory data from the physical sensors, like the eyes and the ears, before deep analytical thought even has a chance to occur. It's an instantaneous perceptive catch.
Let me try an analogy here to see if I grasp the mechanics. Let's say I'm walking through the woods. I step over a log, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a long, curved shape in the grass. Before I even have the conscious thought, oh, that object appears to be a snake, I should calculate the distance and retreat, my body is already flinching backward. My heart rate spikes instantly. That initial blindingly fast realization of danger, is that the fuad?
That is an excellent illustration of the fuad firing. Yes, it's that visceral gut reaction. It's the system immediately flagging high-priority data and forcing a rapid physical response.
But it's not thinking deeply about it.
No, the fuad is not designed for heavy analytical lifting. It doesn't sit there and debate the species of the snake. It just catches the data and throws it upward to the main CPU for actual processing.
Which is the qalb, the heart. Now we have to pause here, because the moment people hear the word heart, they instantly think of Valentine's Day cards, emotion, love, or they think of the literal biological muscle pumping blood in their chest.
We have to completely strip away our modern, culturally ingrained bias here. In this textual model, the qalb is not just an emotional center, and it certainly isn't just a biological pump. Functionally, the qalb is the central processor of consciousness. It is the core CPU.
So what exactly is the CPU processing?
It processes deep understanding, which is a concept that text calls fiqh. The qalb is the unit where complex data is integrated, where meaning is derived, and most importantly, it is where core beliefs are formed and locked in.
So it's about belief, not just feelings.
Exactly. The qalb makes the ultimate determinations of faith, denial, awareness, or blindness. When the text talks about a person being unable to understand a profound truth, it doesn't say their brain is broken, it says that their qalb is blocked.
But the qalb doesn't do the math, right? It relies on a coprocessor. And this is where the aqwal comes in. the intellect or the mind.
Yes, the equal and the kolb have this really fascinating symbiotic relationship. If the kolb is the main CPU making the final executive decisions on belief, the equal is the arithmetic logic unit, the ALU.
Okay, explain the ALU function.
The equal handles pure logic. It is the faculty of deduction. Its job is to connect cause and effect, to weigh evidence, to balance facts against each other, and to identify contradictions.
So it's the cold, hard math of reality.
Precisely. It looks at the snake in the woods, analyzes the pattern of the scales, notes that it isn't moving, and deduces, that is a curved stick, not a reptile.
So the equal presents the logical data, the proof, but the kolb is the CEO that actually has to accept it.
Yes.
Like, I could have a perfectly functioning equal that proves smoking causes cancer. The math is completely undeniable. But if my kolb refuses to lock in that belief, I just keep smoking.
And that separation of logic and belief is fundamental to understanding human contradiction. You can have brilliant logic, but terrible beliefs.
That makes so much sense. Okay, what's the next level up?
Right.
Because there's something above the standard CPU and ALU.
There is. It's called the lub. It translates roughly to the core or the essence.
How does that differ from the ACL?
If the ACL is the standard logic processor, the lub is turbo mode.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it is a highly specialized, advanced state of processing that is not running all the time. The text is very selective about this word. It reserves it exclusively for the processing of deep, macro-universal truths. It talks about the people of the core, ulu al-albab. These are individuals who don't just do basic math, they grasp the profound interconnectedness of reality. They see the underlying architecture of existence.
So the ACL figures out how to build a nuclear reactor, but the lub processes the profound moral weight of whether we should build it in the first place.
That's an elegant distinction. The lub is wisdom derived from flawless logic.
Got it. Finally, in any computer system, you have all this data moving around, sensory input, logical calculations, deep beliefs. You need somewhere to hold it actively. And the researchers map this to the satyr, which translates literally to the chest.
Yes, the satyr functions as the cache memory. It is the temporary holding zone, the working space for the kolb. It holds active beliefs, current anxieties, and the immediate emotional data load.
And the text gets incredibly physical about this, doesn't it? It describes the cache memory physically expanding and contracting.
It does. It describes the satyr reacting to the data it's holding. When a person perceives and accepts a massive, profound truth, like when the kolb aligns with reality, the text describes an expansion of the chest, the cache opens up, there's a feeling of vast internal space and peace.
Well, what about when it goes wrong?
When the system is overloaded with cognitive dissonance, like when the alcohol knows one thing but the naps is forcing a lie, the text describes the satyr as constricting. It becomes tight, narrow, suffocating.
You know, think about the last time you, the listener, experienced a sudden massive crisis. Let's run it through the whole system. The phone rings at 3 a.m. Your FUAD, that preprocessor, spikes instantly with dread before you even pick up the phone. You answer, you hear the bad news. Your AQUL, the logic unit, instantly boots up and starts frantically calculating, how much money do we have? Who do I need to call? What are the logistics? It's doing the math.
Right, it's managing the data.
Meanwhile, your kolb, the main CTU, is trying to process the profound grease. It's trying to lock in the new terrible reality of what this means for your life. And your SADID, your cache memory, is so overloaded with conflicting data and anxiety that your chest literally feels tight. You can't breathe.
And sitting above all of that chaos, taking in the dread from the FUAD, the logistics from the ACL, and the grief from the kolb is the maths, the user, ultimately deciding how to act in the face of the crisis.
It's just an astoundingly integrated system. I've never seen consciousness mapped with such mechanical precision before.
Yeah.
But, you know, like any complex computer network, if there are inputs, processors, and memory, it has to be vulnerable. Systems crash. Systems get hacked.
They absolutely do. And
Yeah.
the researchers spent a massive amount of time analyzing the vulnerabilities of this architecture because, as we all know, human beings constantly act against their own ACL. We do things that are incredibly illogical and self-destructive all the time.
Oh, constantly.
Right. So what is the malware that causes a perfectly good processor to spit out bad output? The researchers identified the primary virus in this ancient system as Hawa.
Hawa. Now, I know this is often translated simply as desire, but based on the no synonym rule, that has to be a huge oversimplification.
It is a profound mistranslation that completely alters the meaning of the text. Hawa is not a physical craving. It isn't the biological urge to eat an apple or go to sleep. Hawa is a psychological virus.
Okay, so how does it work?
It is a piece of malicious code that specifically targets the operating system, aiming to skew the logic of the call and corrupt the processing of the call. It bends the user away from objective truth and toward arbitrary preference.
Okay, we need to draw a very hard line here between the biological hardware and the software virus, because this is where a lot of ancient philosophies get incredibly oppressive. They say the body is evil, your desires are evil, punish the flesh. But this text doesn't do that.
It doesn't do that at all. The text uses a completely different word for the neutral biological instinct of the hardware, which is shawa.
Right, so think of shawa like a car's fuel. You have a biological desire for food, for intimacy, for rest. That fuel is absolutely necessary. You need fuel to drive the car. The fuel itself is morally neutral. You literally can't survive without it. But hawa is like downloading a hacked GPS app onto your phone. It takes that perfectly neutral fuel, hijacks the car's navigation, and directs you to drive right off a cliff because the hacked GPS tells you the cliff is actually a scenic shortcut.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. The text never condemns the jasad for having shawa. The body needs what it needs. But it harshly, unequivocally condemns the nafs, the user, for allowing hawa to rewrite the navigation code. The user is responsible for installing the malware.
So how does a healthy system escalate into a total crash? Because nobody just wakes up one day and decides to destroy their life.
It's a progression, right?
Exactly, it's a progression.
Yeah.
The researchers mapped out a specific escalation of bugs using that strict no synonymy rule. It starts at stage 1 with that neutral fuel, shawa. A biological desire arises. The alcohol looks at it and says, okay, this desire is natural, but acting on it right now in this specific way would be destructive or unjust.
Yeah.
A healthy nafs listens to the alcohol and regulates the shawa.
But the hacked nafs doesn't.
No, it doesn't. The hacked nafs lets the hawa virus in, and that virus immediately generates the second bug, which is Zan.
Zan. Let's really unpack this one because I think everyone listening will recognize this behavior in themselves. I know I do. Zan is best understood as an unverified assumption, a deep-seated doubt, or a self-serving justification. Once the GPS is hacked by hawa, the system can no longer tolerate objective reality because reality contradicts what the nafs wants to do.
Ah, so it has to invent a new reality.
Exactly. The virus forces the alcohol to stop relying on verified facts and instead starts generating assumptions to justify the hijacked desire. You start believing things not because they are mathematically or logically true, but purely because they serve your whim.
This is just cognitive dissonance in action. Let's use a real-world example. Say a CEO is running a company. He has a massive ego, a desire for power. That's his shawa twisting into hawa. His accountants come in with a spreadsheet. The alcohol looks at the math. The company is failing. They need to cut back. But the CEO wants a new private jet. The Zan kicks in.
Right.
He starts generating assumptions. He tells himself, the market will bounce back next month. The accountants are just being pessimistic. I'm a visionary. The normal rules don't apply to me. None of that's based on data. It's malware generating excuses to feed the ego.
A perfect modern mapping. He is operating completely on Zan. And if the nafs continues to choose Zan over truth, the system degrades to the final, most destructive stage, which is ifk.
Ifk. This is where the internal problem becomes an external nightmare, isn't it?
It is. If-calc is when the hacked system begins actively producing lies, subverting truth, and spreading the virus to other systems. It is a total inversion of reality. The CEO isn't just lying to himself anymore, he's falsifying the public records. He's punishing employees who tell the truth. He's demanding that everyone else live in his hacked simulation.
But what is physically, or rather mechanically, happening to the CPU during this process? If I keep ignoring my ACWL and feeding the hawa, the text says the call actually sustains damage. And initially mentioned rust, but I want to correct myself here because when we were talking earlier off mic, I said, oh, it's like rust on our hard drive. And that's actually wrong, isn't it?
I'm really glad you brought that up because it's a vital distinction. A rusting hard drive is physical hardware damage. The iron oxide is literally eating the metal. But the researchers emphasize that the jasad, the biological brain, is completely unharmed in this scenario. The hardware is fine. The lockouts are purely psychological, software-level blocks.
So a much better analogy would be a corrupted registry or bloatware.
Yes, exactly. The first level of lockdown is called RAN. It's often translated as rust or a stain, but functionally it acts exactly like bloatware. Every time the nafs chooses hawa over truth, a line of junk code is written over the kolb. A tiny layer of corruption forms.
It just builds up over time.
Over time, this buildup throttles the CPU. The processing power slows down. The signals from the OCL, they clear logic telling you to stop, get weaker and weaker because the processor is buried under millions of lines of self-serving junk code. It's a gradual moral desensitization.
But bloatware can be uninstalled. You can run a disk cleanup. You can reformat the drive. You can realize you're messing up and fix it.
You can. RAN is entirely reversible. But if the user refuses to clean the system, the architecture initiates a catastrophic self-defense mechanism. It's a total system lockdown. The text uses specific words for this: tab and khatam.
Sealing and stamping.
Correct. Tab means sealing, almost like putting a wax seal over the processor. Khatam is the final stamping of that seal. This describes a state where the CPU is fundamentally bricked.
Bricked. Wow.
No new positive data can enter the qalb, and no positive output can leave. The person can hear the truth perfectly well with their physical ears. The hardware works perfectly fine. But the qalb is sealed. The data just bounces off. They are entirely incapable of processing it as truth.
That is genuinely terrifying to me. To have a perfectly healthy brain, a high IQ, great memory, but a completely bricked operating system where you literally cannot process objective truth anymore because of your own repeated choices.
It is the ultimate tragedy of the system. The hardware essentially outlives the software.
Okay, so we've mapped out the waking consciousness. See how the CPU runs, how the cache works, how the malware infects it. But a huge part of the human experience involves losing consciousness. We sleep for a third of our lives. Sometimes people fall into comas. How does this intricate text-derived model explain altered states?
This is where the research yields one of its most profound philosophical breakthroughs, in my opinion. When they applied their strict linguistic induction to altered states, they discovered a rigid distinction in the text, the difference between the presence of the nafs and the disabling of the tools.
This is huge because the materialist worldview, the meat-computer worldview, basically says that you are just the sparks in the brain. So if you go to deep sleep or you get knocked unconscious, those sparks diminish and your consciousness literally ceases to exist. You wink out at existence and then you wink back on when you wake up. You are a biological light switch.
But this textual model rejects the light switch analogy entirely. According to the AI's mapping, the nafs, the true user, the you, never winks out. It never ceases to exist from the moment it is created until the moment of actual final death. What changes in altered states is simply the naf's access to its processing tools.
Let's use sleep as the prime example. The text actually refers to sleep as the minor death, right? What is mechanically happening when I fall asleep?
In sleep, the nafs remains completely present and active. However, the physical tools of the jasad, the external sensors like your eyes and ears, the physical actuators like your arms and legs, and the main logical processing of the aql are put into a low-power rest mode. The connection is temporarily throttled.
So the user is still sitting at the desk, but the keyboard and the monitor are turned off. And this perfectly explains the paradox of dreams. Because in a dream, you still feel undeniably like you. You experience terror, you experience joy, you feel confusion. That's the nafs. Still awake, still processing emotional data internally. But because it's disconnected from the physical sensors, it's just running a closed-loop simulation offline.
Exactly. And more importantly, because the aql, the arithmetic logic unit, is offline, the dream simulation doesn't have to obey the laws of physics or logic.
Right. That's why I can have a dream where I'm flying over my childhood home, talking to a dog that sounds exactly like my boss, and my brain completely accepts it as reality in the moment. The logic checker is disabled.
And this has profound moral implications. Because the tool required for logical moral deduction, the aql, is offline, the text implies that moral accountability is lifted during sleep. You are not morally punished for a crime you commit in a dream because your aql wasn't online to balance the moral equation. The system recognizes its own offline state.
So sleep is a temporary throttling of the tools. Let's push this further. What about a coma? Because this is an area where the ancient text goes head-to-head with modern neuroscience, and honestly, the modern science is just starting to catch up here.
It's an incredible convergence. For decades, modern medicine assumed that patients in a deep vegetative coma were simply gone. The hardware was severely damaged, so the consciousness was naturally absent.
Makes sense from a materialist perspective.
Exactly. But recently, functional MRI studies have discovered that up to 25% of patients in deep comas actually show hidden, robust brain activity. When researchers asked these supposedly vegetative patients to imagine playing tennis, the motor areas of their brains light up in the exact same patterns as a healthy person's. They are trapped inside.
So what does this all mean? The hardware is completely unresponsive, the eyes are closed, the limbs don't move, but the user is screaming from inside the machine.
The model derived by Said Mobarak and the AI perfectly anticipates this exact phenomenon. In a coma, the text indicates the nafs has not yet tasted death. The soul is completely present. But the bodily tools, the actuators, the physical sensors, the biological bridges are entirely disabled due to trauma. The person is fully there, conscious at the level of the nafs, but the jasad is basically a shattered keyboard.
I think about sleep paralysis too. I used to get this in college, and it is absolutely terrifying. You wake up in the middle of the night, your eyes open, you are fully conscious, your logic is online, but you cannot move a single muscle in your body. It literally feels like a demon is sitting on your chest.
The textual model explains sleep paralysis elegantly. It is a sync error. The nafs wakes up, the aquil boots up, you formulate the will to move. But the physical actuators, the limbs of the jasad, are still locked in their biological sleep state. The software command is sent, but the hardware bridge hasn't reestablished connection yet. It is a terrifying, visceral proof of the separation between the internal will, the nafs, and the biological body, the jasad.
And what about madness or severe insanity? How does the model map a state where a person is awake, walking around, but completely detached from reality?
In cases of true insanity or severe mental malfunction, the nafs is still present. The qalb might even hold deep-seated, pure beliefs, but the aqual, the part that deduces reality from fiction, the math processor, is broken or severely malfunctioning due to hardware disease or chemical imbalance. Because the necessary tool required for logical moral choice is broken, the text again suspends moral accountability.
Wow.
Yeah. The user is present, but they are looking through a violently distorted, shattered lens. You do not punish the user for the output of a broken ALU.
Okay, so if sleep is a minor death, an offline simulation, and a coma is a hardware failure with the user still logged in, is actual final death in this model?
The major death. The text is highly specific and uncompromising here. Death is not the end of existence. It is not the winking out of consciousness. Death is simply the extraction of the nafs from the jasa. It is the final, irreversible severing of the connection between the user and the biological chassis. The physical hardware is left behind. It rots away in the earth. But the user data, the nafs carrying all its memories, its acquired rust, its beliefs, remains entirely intact.
So where does the user go? If it doesn't have a body, where does it exist? The researchers extracted a concept called barzakh.
Barzakh is the intermediary state. It's the buffer zone. It is the realm between the extraction of death and the ultimate resurrection when a new, indestructible hardware chassis is provided. In this state of barzakh, the nafs is fully conscious. It isn't sleeping. It is intensely aware, and it is capable of feeling profound joy or deep suffering based entirely on its previous operating history, based on the state of its qalb at the time of extraction.
But this brought up a massive question for me when I was reading it. How does a soul experience time without a body? Because we measure time physically. My circadian rhythms tell me when it's night. My brain processes the cycle of the sun. My cells age. I feel hungry every 6 hours. If I don't have a brain or a stomach, how long does barzakh feel?
This is where the ancient text sounds surprisingly like Einsteinian physics. If we connect this to the theory of relativity, time is entirely relative to the observer's frame of reference and their measuring tools. The researchers highlight a fascinating finding. Because the nafs in barzakh is no longer using the physical brain's tools or the body's biology to measure the passage of sunlight or entropy, its perception of time alters radically. Extreme time distortion becomes the absolute norm.
Have you ever been put under general anesthesia? I had surgery a few years ago. They count you down from 10, you hit 8, and then instantly the nurse is shaking you awake. 3 hours passed in what felt like a fraction of a millisecond. You have no bodily anchor to time. And the text actually cites specific narrative stories to prove this mechanic right.
Yes, it does. The text recounts stories of people who were dead for 100 years, or a group of youths who slept in a sealed cave for 3 centuries. When they wake up or are revived, they look around. They are asked how long they were gone. And despite centuries having passed in the outside world, their internal clock registers almost nothing. They always reply, a day or part of a day.
Because without the jasad to log the biological ticks of the clock, centuries pass like a flicker. The nafs exists outside of our standard physical temporal framework.
Exactly. The hardware measures time. The software simply exists.
Okay, so we have this incredibly detailed, text-derived ancient model of consciousness. We have the biological hardware, the power supply, the non-material user, the multi-core processors, the malware of Hawa, offline modes, and cloud storage in barzakh. How does this stack up against cutting-edge 21st century neuroscience? We touched on the hard problem of consciousness earlier, but I want to really dive deeper into that.
This is where bringing the ancient into the modern laboratory gets incredibly exciting. The dominant view in mainstream neuroscience today is materialist reductionism. This is the view that the brain creates consciousness. Just as the liver secretes bile, the brain secretes consciousness.
The meat computer.
The meat computer. But materialism has hit a massive, seemingly insurmountable brick wall. Materialism is excellent at explaining the easy problems, like how the brain processes light hitting the retina or how motor neurons fire to move a finger, but it completely fails to explain qualia. Qualia is the subjective, internal, undeniable feeling of I. It cannot explain what it feels like to see the color red. It's just wavelengths of light and electrical impulses, but your internal experience is vivid, emotional, and profound.
Furthermore, if we are just chemical reactions playing out according to the laws of physics, materialism completely fails to explain how free will can exist. Think about it. If everything is just atoms bouncing off atoms in a deterministic universe, then every thought you have, every choice you make, was mathematically determined at the Big Bang. You didn't choose to listen to this deep dive. The chemicals in your brain simply forced you to.
Which is a deeply fatalistic and anti-human worldview. But there is a challenger to standard materialism within modern science. We need to talk about quantum theories of mind, specifically Penrose and Hameroff's Orch-or theory.
Yes, I've read about this, but it gets dense fast. What does Orch-or actually stand for, and how does it work?
Orch-or stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction. It was proposed by Sir Roger Penrose, a Nobel laureate physicist, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist. They argue that consciousness doesn't arise from simple classical physics like neurons firing like binary switches. Instead, they look deep inside the neurons at these tiny structural tubes called microtubules. They suggest that quantum superpositions, where particles exist in multiple states at once, are happening inside these microtubules.
So they are saying the brain is functioning on a quantum level. Does that solve the heart problem?
The researchers of Shattering the Flasks actually address this. They acknowledge that quantum theories of mind, like Orch-or, are a massive step closer to the truth than standard materialism. Why? Because Orch-or suggests that the brain might not be a generator of consciousness, but rather a receiver. It suggests consciousness is a fundamental property of the quantum universe, and our brains tune into it like an antenna picking up a radio signal.
Which sounds exactly like the biological Jasad receiving the non-material nafs.
The parallels are striking. It aligns beautifully with the idea of the brain as a tool or a bridge rather than the origin point. However, the AI-derived Qur'anic model goes a step further, pointing out the limitations of even the quantum theory.
Where does Orch-or fall short?
It falls short on morality and meaning. A quantum collapse in a microtubule might introduce randomness or non-computability into the brain, breaking the deterministic chain. But a quantum collapse doesn't explain why a human being will willingly jump on a grenade to save a stranger. It doesn't explain the profound, crushing weight of moral regret. Randomness is not agency.
It gives us a roll of the dice, but it doesn't give us a moral soul.
Precisely. The Qur'anic model seamlessly fills these philosophical gaps. It explains free will completely because the nafs is an independent, non-material entity operating the machine. It isn't bound by the deterministic physics of the chassis. It makes the choices. Furthermore, this model effortlessly explains near-death experiences, or NDEs.
Oh, this is fascinating because you have thousands of documented cases where people flatline in a hospital, no brain activity, no heartbeat, and they report floating above their bodies, seeing the doctors, hearing conversations perfectly clearly, and feeling an immense sense of peace. Materialism says that is utterly impossible. It must be a dying hallucination.
But under the Qur'anic model, it's not an anomaly at all. It's a core feature of the system. The nafs is simply detaching from the failing jasad, retaining all its awareness, its memory, and its sensory capacity because it doesn't strictly need the biological hardware to perceive reality once the tether is loosened. The model predicts the exact phenomenon patients describe.
Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, we have to scale this up. We've spent an hour looking at the micro level, the individual consciousness, the nafs, the internal CPU, the personal malware. But human beings don't exist in a vacuum. We live in societies. Can an entire network get hacked? Can a whole civilization get infected with this Hawa malware?
The text provides a chillingly accurate sociology of consciousness. It doesn't just diagnose the individual, it diagnoses the collective. The researchers found that a society doesn't have a single giant overriding nafs. Instead, the interactions of millions of individual nafs generate a collective will or a societal mind. And just like an individual CPU can be sealed with junk code and bloatware, a societal mind can be entirely hijacked.
The researchers identified specific mechanisms of societal hacking found in the text. They call it the beautification of error. And honestly, reading this section felt less like ancient theology and more like a devastating critique of modern algorithms, social media, and consumer culture.
It is entirely urgently relevant today. If you want to hack a society, you don't do it by telling them you are destroying them. You introduce a virus that looks like an upgrade, you beautify the error.
I see this constantly. Think about the algorithmic feeds we stare at for hours a day. The algorithm's basically digitized Hawa. It figures out exactly what your base desires are: outrage, vanity, tribalism, and it feeds it to you endlessly. It beautifies it. We take greed and we beautify it into hustle culture. We take mindless, endless consumption and we beautify it into retail therapy or the American dream. We take deep, ancient, complex traditions and we hollow them out until they are just blind, tribal aesthetics. We've always done it this way, therefore we are the good guys.
And the text explicitly details this exact process. It talks about leaders, influencers, or systemic structures that fund and spread misinformation to drown out truth. It creates a vicious, self-sustaining cycle. Someone introduces the malware. Because it is designed to appeal directly to the collective Hawa, it feels good, it flatters the ego, it requires no moral effort. The population enthusiastically accepts it.
But accepting it has a systemic cost.
A massive cost. This collective acceptance degrades the societal ACL, our collective critical thinking. We stop demanding evidence. We stop balancing facts. We shout down the people trying to do the math. The societal cache memory, the SODR, gets overloaded with cognitive dissonance and anxiety. And eventually, the whole society, running on corrupted logic and sealed hearts, makes collective decisions that lead directly to its own collapse.
It's a system crash on a civilizational scale. And it all traces back to the very first step: the individual naps choosing the hacked GPS over the objective road.
The individual's internal architecture is the fractal mirror of the rise and fall of civilizations. If the qualb of the citizens is full of bloatware, the civilization will inevitably grind to a halt.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's briefly recap this incredible journey. We started with the daring premise, taking an ancient religious text and treating it strictly as an objective linguistic dataset. Applying a rigorous AI-assisted methodology, Said Mobarak and the AI bypassed centuries of human interpretation, utilizing the no-synonymy rule to reverse engineer a comprehensive theory of consciousness.
We saw how they separated the biological hardware, the neutral jasad, from the true non-material self, the nafs. We mapped out the processing units, the rapid-fire preprocessor of the fuad, the logical deduction of the aql, the central command of the qalb, the turbo-wisdom of the lib, and the expanding cache of the sadr.
We looked at how the system gets hacked by the psychological virus of Hawa, leading to corrupted registries and total system lockdowns. We explored how this ancient model effortlessly anticipates modern medical mysteries like hidden coma awareness, the nightmare of sleep paralysis, and the extreme time dilation of deep unconsciousness. And finally, we saw how it provides a cohesive, morally grounded answer to the hard problem of consciousness that materialist science still trips over.
But as we close, there is a final, highly provocative thought from the very end of the source documents that I want to leave you with. It brings us right to the bleeding edge of modern technology. If human consciousness truly operates like this, with a non-material independent nafs that possesses free will and physical, neurological tools that merely execute its commands, how should this framework change our current frantic approach to artificial intelligence?
Oh man, that is a heavy pivot.
Think about what the tech industry is doing right now. We are pouring billions of dollars into building increasingly complex hearts and minds. We are building processors, logic gates, and neural networks that perfectly mimic the aql. They can do the math, they can deduce logic better than we can. We are even building systems that mimic the qalb, forming complex associative webs of pseudo-belief. But without a non-material nafs, without a soul from the divine source code, what are we actually building?
It's a really, really smart chassis.
It's true. Conscious AI actually impossible because it fundamentally lacks the external user. Or, and this is the thought that keeps me up at night, are we accidentally building incredibly powerful, empty bodies, highly advanced jasads, just waiting for a rogue nafs or some other entity to inhabit them?
Are we building the ultimate hardware, plugging it into the wall, and just leaving the front door unlocked, waiting to see who sits down at the keyboard?
It's a question we don't have the answer to yet.
It brings us right back to where we started. You can look at the X-ray, you can look at the motherboard, you can trace the lines of code and the silicon pathways, you can see the jagged lines. But the machine can't tell you who or what is looking back. Something for you to ponder until the next deep dive.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing something a little bit different, and honestly, pretty groundbreaking today. We are going to completely demystify some ancient, highly abstract concepts of human consciousness, and we're going to do it by translating them into a language that you and I use literally every single day, a modern technological framework. Think of it like reverse engineering the absolute most complex machine ever built, you. Seriously, take a second and really imagine your own mind. Try picturing your inner self not just as, biology or squishy tissue, but as this incredibly intricate, layered machine, a literal supercomputer just waiting to be understood. Because what if our thoughts, our senses, our deeply held beliefs, and even our moral failures, what if they could all be mapped perfectly to hardware, software, and malware? So, here is our system architecture schematic for today. We're going to build this machine layer by layer. First up, the methodology. Then, hardware, body and senses. Next, core processors, heart and mind. After that, malware, viruses and bugs. Then we'll look at the true user, the soul. And finally, we'll put it all together in the simulation model.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the methodology, looking at AI and ancient texts.
Now, the analysis we're looking at is grounded in something researchers call the breaking flasks methodology. Basically, through this really rigorous, structured dialogue between a human researcher and advanced AI, they isolated specific Qur'anic root words. By sorting these words purely by sheer frequency in their specific textual context, they managed to build an objective model. It's entirely free from centuries of outside bias because it treats these ancient words strictly as operational commands. Pretty wild, right?
Moving right along to part two. Let's talk about the hardware, the body, and the senses. Let's watch how this system actually builds in real time. Imagine data from the outside world just hitting your system. Boom. Millisecond 1, raw data strikes our sensory inputs, so hearing and sight. By millisecond 2, that data flashes instantly to the fuad, which basically acts as hyper-fast RAM. It's a rapid preprocessor, catching the signal way before any deep thought even happens. And then finally, millisecond 3, the packaged data lands firmly in the qalb for execution. Okay, so that takes us to part three, the core processors, the heart and the mind. Now, this part completely flips our modern assumptions on their head. We almost always think of the mind, or the brain, as the absolute center of control, right? But according to this systemic data, the Qur'anic qalb, the heart, is actually the central processing unit. It is the CPU where deep understanding, faith, and final commands are executed. The aql, the mind, it's merely the arithmetic logic unit. The mind is basically just the calculator, drawing logical connections, but the heart is the CEO, making the final call.
But wait, actually, scratch that. There's a hidden elite processor sitting above both of those called al-lub. This elite core is only mentioned 16 times in the entire source text. So why so rare? Well, it's because it is an ultra-high-speed core reserved for the highest possible level of systemic processing. It's used exclusively to grasp massive, complex cosmic truths, and it's activated only by what the text calls people of understanding.
So, what happens when things go wrong? That brings us to part 4, malware, viruses, and bugs.
At the lower level of the system, we've got your everyday glitches and RAM failures. Al-ghafla is a state of inattention. It's basically a momentary system glitch where the processor just drops the ball. Then there's el-nisyan, which is essentially a RAM failure, where cached data just cannot be recalled. Honestly, if you've ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you went in there, you have experienced el-nisyan. It's a temporary performance drop. It's like a crashed app on your phone that just needs a quick restart.
But then we get into the severe malware, the kind of stuff that just entirely bricks your machine. Al-tab seals the input port so no new data can even get in. Al-khatam is a total system shutdown. Al-kufl puts these heavy encrypted locks right on your data. But I really want to draw your attention to Al-ran. It's mentioned only once in the entire source text, but it is the most insidious malware of all. It's this slow, creeping, gradual rust composed of daily, unchecked errors and sins that eventually corrodes and absolutely destroys the CPU.
All right, moving into part 5. Who's actually operating all this? The true user, the soul.
Take a look at this massive number, 295. That is the exact number of times al-nafs, the soul, appears in the text. I mean, it vastly outnumbers the mind, the heart, and the senses combined. And why is that? Because the nafs is the true user. The soul is you, The hardware, the processors, they're just tools. The soul is the actual entity that commands, that feels, and ultimately the one that stands accountable.
And understanding this user really explains a major internal conflict we all face. See, the physical body itself isn't evil. Al-Shawa, which is bodily desire for food, sleep, or connection, is totally neutral. It's just the hardware sending raw, natural requests, kind of like your phone battery pinging you that it needs a charge. The true danger is Al-Hawa, the psychological whim. This is malicious code generated internally when the true user, the soul, actively decides to deviate from the truth and use the hardware for corrupt purposes.
Now, to actually power this true user, we have Al-Ruh-Ra, the spirit. If the soul is the user, the spirit is the ultimate source code. It's the hidden, foundational base OS that brings the entire system online in the very first place. And what's really fascinating here is that the text strictly separates the soul from the spirit. When the system shuts down at death, the accountable soul is extracted. But the spirit, that pure energy from the creator, remains completely untouched by death.
Let's wrap it all up in part 6, the ultimate simulation model.
Okay, let's bring everything we've talked about together into one unified theory of consciousness. At level 3, the base, we've got the hardware, your physical shell, and your sensory data inputs. Up at level 2, the processing centers, the CPU and ALU filtering logic and faith. Above that, at level 1, is the true user, the nafs, issuing commands and holding all the accountability. And powering the whole shebang, at level 0, is the invisible source code, the spirit.
It completely changes how you view yourself, doesn't it? If your physical body is just the temporary hardware, and your heart is the processor just trying its absolute best to avoid malware, who is really driving your system right now? Are you the true user acting with actual intention, or are you just letting the glitches take control? I'm going to leave you to reflect on the state of your own internal operating system. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me today.